Today was finally the day where I made my very first sourdough loaf. I figured I'd just start with a no-knead recipe because they sound pretty foolproof, and I figured I couldn't screw up that badly. I definitely proved myself wrong because my loaf did not turn out great, but this was a really great learning experience, and I feel like my next loaf will turn out a little bit better than my loaf today. The main thing I learned was when to use my sourdough starter in its normal rising and falling cycle. I thought that since my starter was more than doubling in size in a 6-hour period that it didn't matter what part of the rising and falling cycle I used it, but that's just not the case when you're making bread. You really want to use your starter after it has doubled in size from a feeding but is still in that risen state. That is really what helps your dough rise. I let my dough rise for over 12 hours, and honestly it didn't do much, but I figured I had nothing left to lose at this point, so I was going to try to bake it anyway and hope at least something edible would come out of it. I'm hoping that if I make my dough the correct way, scoring becomes a little bit easier because I really want to make some of those really pretty loaves, but if it's going to be like this, there's no chance. I ended up baking this 30 minutes longer than the original recipe that I was attempting to follow called for, and like I mentioned earlier, I don't think I have anything to lose, so I decided I would just place it directly on the rack. But was I wrong? I definitely lost the loaf here, and this was not a great idea. I have no idea what I was thinking. Luckily, I was able to recover the loaf without totally burning my hand off, but it was close because I don't always think things through. I was still hopeful that it would at least be edible, but it wasn't. It just was trash. It wasn't good at all, and it can only get better from here. You're really going to get a glimpse into how clumsy I really am. I like to save my carrot, onion, and celery scraps and put them in the freezer, and then when I need broth, I fill a pot up with water, dump it in, add some salt, and then I just cover it and let it simmer for at least an hour, sometimes 2. I just kind of go on and do other things. But then when I went to strain it, I totally zoned out and I wasn't paying attention, and it overflowed. I lost a decent amount of broth here, but I still had a lot left, so it wasn't really a big deal. But then I just kept spilling it. The first time it was really overflowing, so it wasn't a big deal, but here I am again spilling a ton. I finally started taking my time, and you would have thought that the idea of taking my time would have lasted, but nope, here I am spilling a ton of broth once again. I would have ended up with 3 full jars of broth if I wasn't so clumsy, but that's just how my life goes. I was really hoping that my sourdough loaf was going to turn out. I thought that tomato soup with a fresh loaf of sourdough bread sounded so good, so I decided to make some tomato soup from scratch. I started with adding some carrot, onion, celery, and then about 7 tomatoes to my pot. I added some olive oil, and then I cooked that down for about 15 minutes until everything was soft. And then I added a full quart of veggie broth, added a little bit of salt and pepper to taste, and then I put that on simmer for about an hour. I love making soups because they're so easy for me to get ready during nap time. Then I can just walk away and let it do what it needs to do. Once it was finished simmering, I used my immersion blender and I added about a cup of milk just to make it nice and creamy, and then it was time to taste test to see what else I needed. I ended up adding some parsley and a little bit of basil. I'm not the biggest basil lover, so I added just a little bit, and then I added just a little bit extra garlic powder because you can't ever have too much garlic. I was really pleased with how it turned out, but I think it's really important to see what Zach thinks about it too.
That's really good. It's so smooth. It's like a Tuscan tomato soup.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We really hope that you join us in 2024 as we attempt to be a fully homemade from scratch home. We'll see you next time. Bye.